And then, depending upon the sophistication of the client, they may have more complex assets. Okay. That could include a trust that holds multiple different corporations or LLCs that own different entities or corporations within a business. That can include different types of electronic currency like Bitcoin or other digital currencies.
Hello and welcome to the Attorney Post, where we give you the inside scoop with top attorneys in their field. And now, here's our host, Justin West.
All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Attorney Post, where we discuss what's going on in various facets of the law with lawyers at the top of their game to help you navigate the ins and outs of various legal fields and jurisdictions. Because, as I always say, if you don't know your rights, you don't have any. Today, I'm joined by Andrea Friedman. She is one of the partners anyway, and half of the masthead over at Friedman Friedman, which is a family law practice in New York, working in principally the Westchester office. Andrea, how are you doing today?
I'm fine, thank you. And yourself?
I'm doing very good. Thank you for taking the time. Andrea and I have been talking back and forth a little bit since I think like October. So this was an interview a long time coming, but I'm very excited to have her. Before we get started, as always, we're going to jump over and take a look at her website. You can find Andrea online at sarifriedman.com, and we'll talk about who Sari is in a little bit because it's an interesting part of the masthead there, I'm sure. But that's sarifriedman.com. Again, they have over 90 years of combined experience. They do divorce, custody, collaborative divorce, high net worth divorce, custody, modifications, all of those things. Anything under the family law aegis, especially in the northern section of New York. You can reach out to them by visiting their website, which is, again, sarifriedman.com. We'll have a link to that down below in the description. You can also give them a call at 914-873-4410. That is 914-873-4410. Before we get started, as always, we're going to read from our sponsors. At the top of the hour, our first sponsor is nationalerc.org. You may have noticed a couple years ago, the whole world went through a pandemic and many businesses were forced to shut down, had reduced hours, supply chain issues, interruptions, and ultimately suffered from reduced revenue in 2020 and 2021. What you may not know is that Congress passed the CARES Act, which allocated over $400 billion in stimulus funds for small businesses that never needs to be paid back and is still on the table at this time. This is not a loan like the PPP or Paycheck Protection Program. It is functionally free money in the form of a tax credit that your business can use and can spend in whatever way you think makes the most sense. Right now, nationalerc.org is helping small businesses get the maximum amount of money that they can, and you can calculate and see how much you can get back by visiting nationalerc.org. The average small business that they work with receives over $200,000 to reinvest in their business that, again, never needs to be paid back. The calculator is free, and there's never any fee unless they secure funding for you. That is nationalerc.org. They've helped over $1.3 billion get back into the hands of small businesses like you. Our second sponsor for the day is Groove Funnels or Groove Pages, Groove Everything, groove.cm. If you love spending $5,000 to $10,000 to build a brand new website that allows you to reach out to your customers and clientele, maybe sell them information products, put them in webinars or whatnot, then by all means, keep doing whatever it is that you're doing. But if you're like me, you hate that stuff. And that's why I personally recommend Groove Pages, the all-new, all-in-one website sales funnel platform from internet marketing legend, Mike Filsame. Right now, you can actually get started completely free by visiting theattorneypost.com/groove. That's theattorneypost.com/groove to sign up for free and build a complete site at no cost. Literally no cost, no credit card required. I believe you can actually build up to 3 fully functioning websites at theattorneypost.com/groove. They have a huge list of apps for their platform that'll basically turn into a webinar platform, a sales platform, a funnel, a website, a blog with no monthly fees. They do have upgrades, and a lot of them are one-time upgrades. So you pay one time and you have it functionally for life. One of the reasons I think it's a really cool platform, visit theattorneypost.com/groove to get started today. Alrighty, so jumping back over here, again, here we see sarifriedman.com. This is Andrea's website, and I am joined with the lovely Andrea. Andrea is a partner at Friedman and Friedman Attorneys at Law, which is in New York proper. And she's the head of the Westchester office, as I said. She joined the firm in 2009 with a JD from Hofstra University of Law. She's been recognized for her leadership in matrimonial and family law issues. She's earned accolades such as Emerging Leader Awards from Hofstra Law School and has been named a Super Lawyer Rising Star multiple times. Andrea is noted for her commitment to her clients, embodying diligence and advocacy in her practice, and has been a guest lecturer and teacher of trial skills at Hofstra University School of Law. Her career is marked by numerous awards and recognitions, including being named a top attorney in North America by Who's Who and receiving accolades from the New York Times and various legal associations for her excellence in family law. She also holds degrees in sociology and communications, and I'm sure there's a lot more we can say, but that was already a mouthful. So my first question to you, Andrea, is what did I miss?
Wow, you speak faster than I do.
It's a gift or a curse. I don't know which.
No, you summed it up, obviously, but I've been dedicated to matrimonial and family law for the past 15 years. It's all I do every single day. And my biggest focus is helping my clients through a very challenging time in their life. I do believe that there is life after divorce or any other, tragic situation you're going through, but I help my clients during that time move forward.
Good. Very good. So if I didn't know anything about you, I mean, obviously family law, and you and I had 20, 30 seconds in an elevator. Give me your pitch for your firm. Why do people choose you? What is so special about Friedman and Friedman? What sets you guys apart from a lot of the other law firms that are out there?
Sure. I believe that we're very well respected in the community. We have extensive courtroom and trial experience, but we're also very capable of settling matters at a court, and we try to do so if the matter warrants it and is appropriate. But what's most important is that we focus on our clients. No two clients are the same. No two sets of situations are the same. And it's very important for us to be client-centered and focused on the outcome as best we can within the confines of the law. And I try to do a good job of being direct and honest with my clients so that they have realistic expectations of what the outcome of their situation will be.
Awesome. I mean, that makes perfect sense. And that's, I think, what I would want my family law attorney to do. So that is good. So let me ask you this, Andrea, what got you into law? Were you the kid that grew up watching Perry Mason reruns? Did you have Lawyer Barbie, or did you kind of stumble across, law as an aptitude? Is it something that runs in the family, maybe?
Sure. So, of course, it does run in the family. My mom/partner, Sarah Friedman, has been practicing matrimonial and family law for now over 40 years. So I did have that exposure, but that's not necessarily why I got into it. Why I got into it was I decided to go to law school because I thought that would be an important way to help people and make an impact on the world. And naturally, I gravitated towards matrimonial and family law because of the exposure I had from my mom. And I realized that I could really help people, that one by one, with each client who came into my office, I could make a direct impact more than I personally felt I could help some company or some entity. And so I really enjoyed the personal aspect of working with an individual person going through a difficult time and hopefully helping them move forward in a positive way.
It's awesome. Very much. So let me ask you this, and this is an off-the-cuff question here. Obviously, one of my sponsors is National ERC, and I mentioned the whole pandemic thing. We obviously got through with that. Hopefully, we're not going to see it coming back again. But I know that a lot of attorneys had very different experiences of the pandemic, different states, different regions, all operate different ways. Can I just ask, how did the pandemic affect you guys? Did it affect your business at all? Did you have to shut down? Did you go to Zoom trials? And did you happen to notice either a spike or a plateau or a dip in the number of cases that you guys were seeing due to the pandemic?
Right. Yes, it definitely impacted everything. I would say in March of 2020, things shut down. The court systems shut down. There was a period of time before anything electronic or virtual had even been set up. And so it was really very much in the dark. And then slowly the New York court system was able to get things online, and they were conducting appearances. Initially, I believe it was through Zoom, and then they quickly moved over to Teams, which they still use to this day. I do think that the pandemic was helpful as far as digitalizing law. It's one of the most archaic professions that people would still use fax machines. And I think since COVID, everybody has gone digital with the electronic filing systems and the storage of data and materials. And I think in that sense, COVID was very helpful for the profession to propel it in a technological way. I think that from a client standpoint, there were certainly a lot more stories about why marriages broke down, possibly due to new family dynamics from COVID, whether that was spending too much time in the home, possibly depression, possibly use of alcohol or other narcotics. But everyone had their own story. But I do think that became somewhat of a underlying theme for certain people seeking a divorce as to why now their marriage was breaking down.
Yeah, I've had a lot of attorneys tell me that they appreciated the streamlining of things, going digital, being able to do Zoom or Teams or whatever the specific state requirement version of that was. And I, for one, am very excited to see the death of the fax machine, because I still, to this day, cannot stand those things. And They can't go away too soon, but I'm sure it'll be another 150 years before the federal government actually stops using them. So, it's a necessary evil, I guess.
Right.
So you've been practicing for quite some time. Again, you joined on to the law firm, spearheaded by your mother or mastheaded by your mother,
Mhm.
back in 2009. So you've been practicing law for quite some time now, going on 15 years, if I can do the math correctly in my head, this year.
That's
So
correct.
congratulations on that. In your 15 years of practicing law, I am sure that you've probably had both some successes and some failures. And my longtime listeners know one of my favorite questions is to tell me about one of your failures. Not because I want to hear you wallow in misery, right? But I'm sure that I think most of my listeners understand that failure sometimes is the best teacher. And any failure that you learn from really is kind of a slow burn win, right? So can you tell my listeners, Andrea, about one of the times in your practice of law, maybe early on, maybe last week, whatever it happened to be, where you experienced a setback or a failure, but what did you learn from that, and how do you carry that forward to make sure you're always giving the best care to your clients?
Sure. I think it's a great question. There's nothing necessarily specific that steps out, but of course, as you pointed out, it's the practice of law for a reason. And so, lawyers, of course, are going to have wins and losses and, positive moments and negatives. And I think the most important thing to take from it is that you have to learn from your mistakes. And in situations where I've had a decision not go my way, or I have found that I made a mistake, I don't make that mistake again because I am so dedicated to this area of the law and understanding every specific nuance of it that it's so important to me to be as best as it I can be. As far as a major takeaway, sometimes I think, especially as a younger attorney, there's a need to disassociate yourself from your client and to understand they are their own person going through their thing. And it's important for you to remain professional and their sounding board of reason. And so sometimes it's important for me to remind clients of that so that they understand my role in this process for them. Because if they don't have clear understandings of that, then it can lead to ineffective representation. So I would say the number one thing is always maintaining that boundary. And otherwise, it's always learning from your mistakes and moving forward.
I think it's the best thing that I've heard when I hear you say it, and I've heard other people say it too. It's the practice of law, and practice makes perfect. And when you practice, you stumble occasionally, but as long as you're always working your way forward, I think that's good. My listeners don't know this. My son, my oldest son, I've got 5 kids. He's my number 2 child, but his team just won going to nationals, so they'll be out in Maryland this fall for mock trial. So he's actually getting to kind of practice this whole law aspect. And I think it's a really neat process. When I was a kid, we didn't have mock trial, so I think it's really kind of neat to see. But he's like, yeah, it really is practice, and you really have to go through it and learn the steps. And I hear them object to all sorts of things, and I'm like, I don't even know what that objection means. So I'm always impressed by that. So let's put the shoe on the other foot, though.
Sure.
I'm sure that you've had some great successes as well.
Yeah.
Undoubtedly, I'm sure you've had some cases. Maybe you had surprise wins. You're like, oh my gosh, this is just not going our way. And then all of a sudden, the judgment not only is in your favor, but better than what you thought. Or maybe it's just one of those cases where you're like, I know that the right decision happened and everyone is in the best spot because of this. Can you tell my listeners about a couple of those cases that are kind of like the feather in your proverbial cap?
Sure. And again, not to name names, but as I just said, I do have wins and I've had some cases of first impression and I've had some great cases where I've won clients custody based on very acrimonious situations. I've argued at the appellate division and won appeals in cases of first impression. And ultimately, sometimes the facts are just on your side. And ultimately, sometimes you just get it just lines up well where the judge understands your arguments, the client is on board and easy to work with, and everything just falls in your way. So I obviously take great pride in those successes. And I am ultimately super happy that I've helped my client in, achieving what, was ultimately, hopefully a grand slam, right, from that analogy. But, I also take pride in the little wins, when clients just appreciate where they started versus where I got them to, that also could be rewarding in itself.
That makes good sense, and that's exactly what I'd expect. So that's really good. What's one of the most absurd things you've encountered? I one of my favorite new questions I ask a lot of my guests is I am sure that you've encountered just absurdity. Maybe it's just client expectations. Maybe it's the judge's reaction. Maybe it's the way the case shook out. But what's one of the most absurd things you've encountered in your practice of law, Andrew?
I mean, there's a lot of personality that I navigate, not just with clients, with opposing counsel and judges sometimes. So I would have to say the most absurd thing is when something is just totally out of left field that, two reasonable people could never have imagined it could have happened, but it did. And sometimes it's just a matter of navigating that, absurdity. Sometimes it can be a wacky decision from a lower court, and that's why there's an appeals court. Sometimes it can be dealing with an adversary who's just totally unprofessional. Sometimes it can be saying to a client, that is completely unreasonable, and I'm not going to do that. It just depends upon the circumstances, but I've seen a lot.
There's actually one of our most recent guests. In fact, I don't even know if the interview is live yet, but she actually had a judge pull a gun on her
Oh, that's crazy. Wow.
in court. And there's questions about whether he was just disarming himself, but he definitely like on video points it at her, which is fascinating.
That's
And so,
scary.
we talk about conflicts of personality. I mean, there's conflicts of personality and there's conflicts of personality. Have you ever had opposing counsel just like blow up in your face or anything like
Yes.
that? Or,
Yes. And I've got my standard ways of handling it depending upon if I'm in person or
I
or
was
even
gonna say, how do you keep your cool in those moments?
I am very good at compartmentalizing. I mean, that's not to say that someone hasn't ever gotten under my skin. Of course, it has happened. But I have found after 15 years, I've got more patience than I ever knew I had.
Well, that's good. And just like any skill, when you practice it, you grow in it. I guess if you practice patience, you grow in patience as well. So it is definitely a virtue worth growing in. Let's talk about your specific areas of law that you practice. We were talking a little bit beforehand as well. You really kind of seem to focus on and specialize in things like high net worth divorce. And a lot of my listeners probably don't really know what's the difference between a divorce and a high net worth divorce. I mean, obviously one of them has high net worth, right? But what does that mean? Does it mean one party, both parties? Does it mean there's businesses involved? What are the details that go into a high net worth divorce that you have to be juggling and bearing in mind when you're handling a case like that?
Right. Great question. I think it just depends upon the complexity. In any divorce, one of the things that has to be resolved is money. And money can be essentially in two categories in New York. One is equitable distribution, right? Properties and debts. And the other one is support. And that can be spousal support, which in layman's terms, people know as alimony, or it can be child support. And then, depending upon the sophistication of the client, they may have more complex assets. Okay. That could include a trust that holds multiple different corporations or LLCs that own different entities or corporations within a business. That can include different types of electronic currency like Bitcoin or other digital currencies. So some people who have different compensation packages, they're not just a standard W-2 employee. They may have restricted stock or deferred compensation. So it's important to understand the totality of all the assets in each one, and then to see how they fit together, right? Because different situations, as I said earlier, require, a different analysis. You could have someone who makes a very large salary, but for whatever reason, they didn't save a lot during the marriage. So how is the support going to be factored in at the end of the case versus someone who saved a tremendous amount and maybe there's a lot of retirement money or there's a lot in savings that will get divided up. And so there's less of a concern for how each of them will support themselves going forward. So that's just one example, but it gives you a generic understanding of what could be involved that all falls under the umbrella of we need to resolve this as part of the money in order to get you divorced.
Makes sense. When you're handling a high net worth or even just a high profile divorce case, how do you handle confidentiality and privacy concerns? Like, is that just a not even a thing you have to think about, or is that like a constant focus?
So it depends on the situation. The matrimonial laws in New York do have the confidentiality of all the documents. So while the case is listed on a public website, you can't get access to the documents unless you're a party to the action or you're the lawyer. So there is that built-in confidentiality. It depends upon the people. I mean, to the extent that there are people who broadcast inappropriate things, then perhaps you do need court intervention. And that's where you seek injunctive relief or orders of protection, depending upon the circumstances for those individuals. And then there can be an extreme case where you can ask the court for anonymity for the case caption, but that's a special proceeding.
Gotcha. Have you noticed that social media has, in the last 15 years since you've been practicing law, has it really risen in its prominence in the way that it factors into various divorce cases?
Yes and no. I mean, you'd be surprised what people put on the internet, which can undermine what they're doing in a proceeding of certain positions they take. So in that sense, absolutely. But the other thing that's important, at least from the divorce standpoint, is that New York is now essentially considered no fault. So you can't contest grounds for divorce. So whereas, before 2010, people could contest it and perhaps, I mean, social media wasn't as prevalent, but perhaps there would have been evidence of the fact that we were in an intact marriage or there's no reason for us to be getting a divorce. It's become irrelevant now. So now you're really looking at it more from the perspective of custody issues, right? What are people putting on the internet and how are they spending their time, right? Is someone out posting pictures of themselves drinking all night, right? That could obviously not be, helpful for you if you're going through a custody litigation. It also could affect, support. Like, let's say you're not employed, but you have a LinkedIn profile out there and you're boasting about all your accomplishments. Well, clearly, someone in a divorce is going to go and look at your profile and try to use that as part of the proceedings in order to counteract your claim that, you're needing of support. So it certainly can always, anything you can find on the internet can always somehow become relevant. And I always tell clients to be careful what you're putting online.
I think that's sage advice just in general. We actually don't let our kids have social media until they become adults. So my
Right.
oldest daughter turned 18 last summer, so she finally got a Facebook account and follows her dad, is embarrassed by everything he posts now. But
There you go.
that's my prerogative as her father, so I
Right.
get to embarrass her. Sorry. So I had another question and I made a joke and I lost my train of thought. Let me
That's
go to a
okay.
prepared
Take your
question.
moment.
um how do you so one of the other things you do is you do collaborative divorce.
Yes.
And how does a collaborative divorce differ from, let's say, a no-fault divorce or just a traditional divorce?
Right.
And is one of them easier? Is one of them more preferred? What is a collaborative divorce? Because a lot of people have actually messaged me that question before.
So a collaborative divorce is actually the process in which you get divorced. So when someone is getting a divorce, there are different ways that they can proceed to do that. Because ultimately, in order to get a divorce, you have to have an agreement, meaning, right, the parties assign an agreement where they agree on all the what we call ancillary relief, custody and the money, right? The assets and the support. If they don't agree, they end up in a court of law, and a judge ultimately renders a decision at the end of the case by trial. So when people do collaborative law, they're making an affirmative agreement that they're not going to bring their case to court. They're going to continue to negotiate with lawyers. They will possibly bring in other necessary experts, like a financial expert or a psychological expert, but they are going to use a professional team to help them facilitate the divorce without the looming threat that someone could file for court intervention over their heads.
Okay. So it really is kind of an alternative to litigation.
100%, it's an alternative to litigation.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I think one of the other questions I was going to ask you a minute ago popped back into my head. So I know another big aspect of family law obviously is going to be custody issues. And one of the questions I often have, I have to assume that doing family law, sometimes you just encounter bad situations.
Mhm.
How do you maintain, I mean, I guess compartmentalize is part of the answer, but have you ever had a client that really wanted full custody, but you yourself were of the mindset that maybe it wasn't in the best interest of multiple people involved, whether it's the client, the spouse, or the children? How do you handle a situation like that? Or is that your job is to represent the client, period, and you go for what they want? Or how do you handle that, if that makes sense?
Sure. I think that it's important to remember that I don't meet people's children. And the law is designed that way for a reason. I don't meet your child. I don't want to meet your child. They very likely will have their own attorney if it's a litigious custody situation, and they're going to be represented that way. So my job is to represent my client as best as I can under the confines of the law. So long as it's ethical and appropriate, then I will zealously advocate for them on their behalf. And ultimately, if I can't negotiate a resolution that under the legal standard best interest of the child can be reached, then a court's going to make that decision. Now, sometimes I agree with judges' decisions and sometimes I don't, but ultimately I have to do the best I can for my client to present their case. Sometimes I really do think that they are the stronger one, and sometimes I don't. And sometimes, not for nothing, both people are imperfect and they both have flaws. And, this system unfortunately highlights that under a microscope. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's indicative of who they are when this process ends.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Do you ever deal with clients that have international businesses? And in those situations, what happens? Are US laws and divorce laws able to even touch those things, or because they're offshore in another country? How does that all play out? Is that something
Sure.
that you guys
Good
have a
question.
part in?
So it depends. Sometimes so technically speaking, if it's a property overseas, then New York may not have jurisdiction to effectuate the actual like sale of a property. But as part of the New York divorce decree, they can determine equal distribution of that asset, or parties can do it in an agreement. So, for example, I had years ago a client who had moved back from the UK and there were still retirement assets there. And as part of the New York divorce, we agreed on how that was going to be divided up. And it turns out we had to work with a local barrister in the UK in order to physically effectuate that process. So it just depends upon the circumstances of the type of asset and how the court wants to handle it. But it certainly can be addressed.
Sure. It, does does handling the complexity of a custody case or a high net worth case, does it ever get to you? Do you ever wind up just at the end of the day totally fried? And if so, what do you do to decompress?
Sure. So I definitely think that I work in a high stress environment. So when I'm in the office and I'm working, I am very focused. And at night, I do need to decompress. And obviously, sometimes I do need to get some work done or I'll check email, but I really do take that time for myself to decompress, to watch or read something that is just, probably considered frivolous or, trashy. And otherwise, I spend time with my children and my husband, and I do need that quote unquote time off. So that way, when I come in the next morning, I am refreshed, ready to go, and can focus.
Gotcha. You had mentioned before, and I had just heard about this about a month or so ago, that New York only recently accepted or adopted no fault divorce laws, which I think is like almost the rule of law across most of the states in the country, if I'm not mistaken. What other changes do you see coming down the pipeline of the law? Do you think there's going to be other major changes like that are tectonic shifts in the way that family law is practiced, or do you think that was probably the biggest thing you're going to see in the next decade or two?
No, I think there's going to be a lot more. I think one of the major things that's been going on over the past several years is the definition of who a parent is. There was a case that came out of the Court of Appeals between a same-sex couple where a non-biological parent who was not married was given what's called legal standing in order to seek custody of the child who was born, obviously out of wedlock. And so you're starting to see more and more progressiveness in the law, mostly through case law, in order to allow these non-traditional families to maintain relationships once, they're no longer going to live together or have a family, that the children, don't get deprived of one parent. And what's interesting about it and why it may even change further, and there's been recent legislation where there's a little bit of a crossover with surrogacy. I recently did a CLE presentation for the Westchester Women's Bar on what happens to a frozen embryo in the event of a divorce, which came out of a case I recently had where the two parties had frozen embryos and we had to deal with the disposition. The law in New York right now for the past 20 years is that if there's a contract between them, then that's how it'll be divided. But there's no law right now about, well, what happens if there is no contract, which is what happened in my case. So we ultimately settled my case and they agreed to donate the embryos to an anonymous third party. But I think there's a huge hole in the law right now, and I'll be interested to see how this develops either through legislature or case law as to what courts are going to do if there's no contract, how to balance the equities, if that's what they're going to do, on how to deal with these frozen embryos.
There was a similar case somewhere down south, like last month, if I recall.
Well, there was the Alabama case that recently came out about IVF.
That was the one.
And how they're going to treat the embryos under the law, which is a little bit different. In New York right now, the law still has embryos not classified as persons. And so then it's like, okay, so are they property? Right. And then if you read the dissent on the leading case out of the Court of Appeals, one of the justices argues, well, it should sort of be something in the middle, right? They shouldn't be persons, but they shouldn't be property. They should be treated, better than special tissue, right? Like an organ. So it'll be interesting to see how the law develops on it, but it's certainly interesting.
I believe it's a Chinese curse to say, may you live in interesting times.
Sure.
It's a and way of saying, I wish you not the best.
Fair.
But we live in interesting times, for lack of a better term. Well, Andrea, I don't want to take up too much of your time. I know that you got a hard stop coming up in the not too distant future, and you've already been very generous with your time. So here in a minute, what I'll probably do is ask you my closing questions.
Sure.
And just to refresh those so you can kind of percolate on those, the first question would be, if we can go back in time, meet young Andrea, what advice would you give yourself and why, other than the obvious, buy a lot of Bitcoin, hold it till 70K? And then question number two is, if I were to give you my magic pen here and you could change a law, add a law, strike a law from the books, what law would you change and why? While you're percolating on that, however, we're going to jump back over and take a look at your website. Again, I'm talking with Andrea Friedman. She is half of the masthead at Friedman and Friedman. You can find her online at sarifriedman.com. She is the head of the Westchester and Rockland County Family Law Office up there at Friedman and Friedman. Very high accolades, lots of great stuff on the website, and there's just so much to dig in here. And she clearly is a wealth of knowledge. If you are interested, if you are finding yourself in need of a family law attorney and you are in the New York area, please feel free to reach out to her. Again, visit sarifriedman.com, link in the description down below as always, or give them a call today at 914-873-4410. That's 914-873-4410. Our final sponsor for today is Rank with News. If there was a guaranteed way to get your law firm or business featured in major national publications like Yahoo News or Forbes, Bloomberg, and Business Insider and others, and to see those articles ranking locally, sometimes nationally, in under 8 hours or less for major competitive keywords that people were looking for, what else would you need to know? Rank with News is simply the most powerful way to hit page one in under 2 weeks safely, organically, and permanently. It's essentially guaranteed SEO or search engine optimization on steroids, ranking quickly and sticking sometimes indefinitely. If you're tired of poor visibility for your business or firm, visit rankwithnews.com or rankwith.news to learn more and to book a time to speak with a specialist about featuring your firm or business in major national 8-figure traffic sites that can help launch you to page one in a matter of hours and help you dominate your local marketplace. Get media exposure, rank higher in Google, build credibility, and win more customers and clients with rankwithnews.com. All right, so final questions for you. Question number one, we go back in time without, involving some sort of a weird space-time paradox. We meet young Andrea, and you're able to give her some advice fresh out of law school. What advice would you give yourself, and obviously by extension, maybe someone else that's just now getting started in their practice of law?
Every lawyer and judge that you admire or look up to started where you did. They graduated law school and they had to start at the beginning. So don't worry about what you don't know. Try to enjoy what you're learning and you'll get there.
That's good advice. It's very straightforward. And I think that applies to everybody, no matter where you are.
Right.
Have your heroes, have your idols, look up to them. But remember, they're humans just like you, and they started where you are, and keep on keeping on. So question number two. Now, I happen to have here a magical pen. This is from a Benedictine Abbey in Atchison, Kansas. I'm going to give them a free shout out. It's kansasmonks.org. And one of the priests must have blessed this pen, because this pen seems to have magical, holy abilities. It can strike laws from the books. It can edit laws on the books, or it can change laws. If I were to give you this pen, Andrea, and allow you to make one edit, one change, one adjustment, whatever it happened to be, or strike a law from the book, what law would you change and why? And this can be a local law that annoys the heck out of you because it makes you fill out forms in triplicate 8 times a week. This could be a national law with sweeping ramifications, maybe even an international law. What would you change if I let you use the pen?
So without being too political and being the most broad I can from the totality perspective, I think there just should be some better way to get people divorced than the litigation process. Having done it, having won, having lost, I think that it leaves much to be desired in certain respects for litigants, if for no other reason than the bureaucracy of time. And if there was a way to make it more efficient, then I think that would be overall helpful for people.
It's a family law attorney who wants to eventually get herself out of family law.
There you go.
But, for the sake of the people involved. And I guess that is still a noble pursuit. Well, Andrea, thank you very much for taking the time to talk with me and my listeners today. I do appreciate the time that you've given us. And again, I want to be respectful of your time. I do always like to let my guests have the final ultimate word. Are there any last thoughts or parting words of wisdom you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Thank you for listening. Please visit my website. If you do know someone in the area who needs a matrimonial and family law attorney, please have them reach out.
That is totally fine and a great plug. This has been The Attorney Post. I am your host, as always, Justin West. If you're listening to this on YouTube, give us a like, subscribe, a share, whatever it happens to be. Comment down below on something you found interesting in this video. Also, if you did find this entertaining or you found this interesting and you know someone who could benefit from this information, please feel free to share this video with them. Help them get in touch with Andrea. Because again, you want to help people have all the information at their fingertips. If you're listening to any of the podcast repositories, a like, subscribe, share, rate, whatever it is they let you do is always helpful as well. As always, this is the Attorney Post. I've been chatting with Andrea Friedman about family law in New York. This podcast, though we deal with lots of legal topics, does not itself constitute legal advice. And if you have a legal issue, you should always seek the competent advice of an attorney in your area who focuses on the matter you need help with. However, I can say if you live in New York and you need a family law attorney, someone who specializes in high net worth divorces, collaborative divorces, things along those lines, Andrea seems like she has a great head on her shoulders and be a wonderful resource for you. So again, link down below in the description, but that is SariFriedman.com is her lawsuit, is her law firm's website. And I think she would be a wonderful resource for you because, as I always say, if you don't know your rights, you don't have any. So make sure you know your rights, keep them protected. Until next time, thanks for listening, guys, and have a good one. Bye-bye.